The curse of being too smart, Schopenhauer's dark view. What if being intelligent, truly intelligent, wasn't a blessing, but a curse? What if the more you understood the world, the harder it became to live in it? This isn't just a poetic thought experiment. It's a philosophical dilemma that Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest thinkers in history, faced head-on. He believed something most people would never dare say out loud, that intelligence, deep awareness, and profound understanding often lead not to happiness, but to suffering. And if you've ever felt like you see things too clearly, like your insight distances you from others, you're not alone. You might just be living Schopenhauer's reality. Let's start with the basic idea. Most of us are taught that intelligence is good, that being smart helps you get ahead, solve problems, make better decisions. And in many ways that's true. Intelligence is power. But Schopenhauer flips this entirely. He says, the more intelligent you are, the more you feel, and the more you notice, the more you suffer. Because intelligence isn't just about solving equations or writing essays, it's about perception. And when your perception sharpens, so does your awareness of pain, of loss, of how deeply flawed life actually is. The more you understand, the more you realize how fleeting pleasure is, how inevitable decay becomes, how much unnecessary suffering fills the world.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Imagine walking through life wearing emotional sunglasses. You see what you need to see, but you're protected from the full intensity of it. That's what most people experience. But intelligence is like taking those sunglasses off in the middle of a blinding sun. You see everything. The beauty, yes, but also the rot beneath the surface. You see the futility of so many human efforts, the shallow patterns of social behavior, the illusions that most people cling to for comfort. You see how people chase love that isn't real, careers that don't fulfill them, and pleasures that fade before they're even fully enjoyed. That awareness doesn't always make you better. Sometimes it just makes you lonely. Schopenhauer saw this loneliness as inevitable. He believed that the truly intelligent person is almost doomed to isolation, not because they want to be alone, but because they can't relate anymore. When you're surrounded by people who talk about trivial things, who avoid depth because it's uncomfortable, people who live in illusions because the truth is too heavy, you start to feel like an alien. A ghost drifting through a world that only half exists. You nod, you smile, you play along. But inside, you're screaming for a conversation that goes deeper than weather and ambition. You want to talk about death, about meaning, or about the absurdity of existence. But no one wants to go there, so you stop trying. And here's the paradox. The smarter you are, the more you crave truth. But truth doesn't always heal, it often hurts. Schopenhauer viewed life itself as suffering. He believed our desires are endless, and satisfaction is temporary at best. The more intelligent you become, the more you see this pattern. You see how people are tormented by the very things they chase. How happiness is a brief pause between two disappointments. How love, once romanticized, often turns into obligation or resentment. How ambition, once noble, becomes addiction. It's not that life has no joy, it's that joy is always undercut by transience. And when you know that, you can't unknow it. So what does this mean for us? If intelligence brings suffering, should we wish to be less aware? Should we envy those who live simply, who don't question, who accept the world as it is? Schopenhauer might say yes. He admired animals because they live without reflection. They act, they feel, they respond, but they don't agonize. They don't lie awake at night contemplating their purpose. They don't write books about existential dread. They just live. And in that, there's a kind of peace that humans, with all our intellect, can never have. Because we are cursed with thought, with memory, with imagination, with what if. But there's a deeper layer here. The curse of being too smart isn't just about pain, it's about disconnection. The more you perceive, the harder it is to connect. Because connection requires shared illusions. Believing in the same stories, the same rules, the same dreams. When you see through those things, you start to feel like you're living in a different dimension. You watch others build their lives on foundations you know are crumbling. And you wonder, should I tell them? Or will it help? Or will it just make them suffer like I do? It's a heavy burden. And yet, many of us carry it. Maybe you felt it too, that strange ache of being in a room full of people and feeling completely alone. Not because you're unloved, but because you're unseen. Because the thoughts that haunt you have no place in casual conversation. Because your questions are too big, too sharp, too uncomfortable. And so you stay silent. You laugh when you're supposed to. You nod when the others speak. But inside you're asking, is anyone else awake? In the next part, we'll dive deeper into this alienation and explore why the intelligent often feel like outsiders, even when surrounded by people. We'll ask, is isolation the price of insight? And can anyone truly understand you if they don't see the world the way you do? The outsider's burden, why intelligence separates us from the world. Let's be honest, being intelligent doesn't always feel like a gift. Sometimes it feels like exile. You walk through life not just seeing what's in front of you, but what lies beneath. You see the motivations behind the words, the fears behind the smiles, the contradictions people carry without even realizing it. And the more you see, the more you feel apart, not above, not superior, just elsewhere. Like you're living slightly outside the frame everyone else is in. That's the outsider's burden. The deeper your insight, the harder it becomes to belong. Schopenhauer understood this exile better than most. He didn't just believe that intelligence leads to suffering, he believed it leads to separation. The intelligent person, he wrote, often prefers solitude, not because they hate people, but because they can't stand the noise, the superficiality, the endless repetition of the same shallow conversations, the same recycled opinions, the same avoidance of depth. It's not arrogance, it's exhaustion. When your mind is wired to explore, to analyze, to question, small talk becomes unbearable. You don't want to talk about the weather. You want to talk about the weather as a metaphor for impermanence. But who wants to go there with you? And so, slowly, the intelligent withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. They begin to curate their social world, not for popularity, but for peace. They choose solitude not as a retreat, but as a refuge. Because solitude is one of the few places where their minds can breathe freely, where they don't have to shrink themselves to fit, where they can think without interruption, without translation, without the need to constantly make themselves palatable. But this retreat comes at a cost. The cost is connection. The cost is community. And most of all, the cost is being seen. Here's the paradox. Intelligent people often crave connection more deeply than anyone, but they find it harder to attain, because real connection requires mutual understanding. And when your thoughts stretch into strange, uncomfortable territories, when your questions unsettle, rather than entertain, you stop being relatable. You become abstract. You become difficult. But people may admire your intellect, but they don't join you in it. They keep their distance. They laugh nervously. They change the subject. And you learn over time to keep some of your thoughts to yourself. Not because they're wrong, but because they're too much. So what happens? Slowly, the intelligent become performers. They wear masks. They edit their minds in real time. They become fluent in the language of fitting in. But it's a strange kind of fluency, like speaking your second language all the time and never being able to return to your native tongue. You smile, you nod, you say the right things. But inside, there's a quiet ache, a hunger for someone who speaks your language without translation, someone who doesn't just tolerate your thoughts, but resonates with them. And here's the real tragedy. Most intelligent people never find that resonance. They live entire lives surrounded by people who like them, admire them, even love them, but don't understand them. And so a kind of spiritual loneliness sets in, a loneliness that isn't about being alone, but about being unseen. And this loneliness isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's subtle. It lives in the gaps between conversations, in the pauses after you say something too honest, in the way others look at you when you ask a question they don't want to answer. This is why Schopenhauer believed the intelligent are more prone to melancholy. Not because they're broken, but because they're awake. They see the absurdity of social rituals. They feel the weight of unspoken truths. They sense the impermanence of everything people cling to, and they carry that awareness like a shadow. It doesn't go away. It deepens, and over time it becomes part of who they are. Not a mood, but a mode, and a way of being in the world that's both rich and isolating. But here's the question: is it better to belong blindly or to walk alone with clarity? Would you trade your vision for comfort? Would you choose connection over truth if the truth made you unrelatable? These are not easy questions. They cut to the heart of what it means to be human. Because we are social creatures, we need others. But we are also thinking creatures, we need truth. And when those two needs collide, which one wins? In the next part, we'll go even deeper into Schopenhauer's most haunting idea that the more intelligent you are, the more you suffer, not just from others, but from yourself. We'll explore how self-awareness, when paired with deep intellect, creates a kind of inner torment that no external condition can fix. The inner abyss, how self-awareness becomes self-torment in the intelligent mind. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't come from the world or from others. It doesn't come from rejection or failure or heartbreak. It comes from within, from the mind turning inward so deeply and so relentlessly that it becomes its own worst enemy. This is the pain that Schopenhauer knew intimately, the pain of self-awareness. Not the casual self-awareness of being self-conscious, but the profound, philosophical kind that splits your soul into two, the one who lives and the one who watches you live. The intelligent mind doesn't just experience life, it dissects it, evaluates it, questions it, and in that endless analysis, a terrible thing can happen. You begin to suffer from your own existence. Think about it. Most people go through life reacting. They feel, they respond, they move on. But the highly intelligent don't just feel, they examine their feelings. They don't just suffer, they wonder why they suffer. They don't just want, they question what desire even is. And here's where the curse sharpens. The more you understand yourself, the harder it becomes to justify your own behaviors, your own needs, your own identity. You see through your own illusions. You catch your ego in the act. You notice your excuses, your contradictions, your self-deception. Nothing inside you is sacred anymore. Everything becomes data to be scrutinized. And soon you realize you aren't even safe from yourself. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence brings with it a higher degree of suffering, not because the world becomes harsher, but because the self becomes heavier. He saw the self as a battleground between the will to live, to want, to strive, and the intellect, which sees the futility of it all. The will says, keep going. The intellect says, why? And when you're smart enough to hear both voices clearly, you're trapped. No matter what you do, a part of you is always questioning it. You can't just enjoy, you interrogate your enjoyment. You can't just love, you analyze the mechanics of love. You can't just be, because being itself becomes a philosophical problem. This is the inner abyss. It's not depression in the clinical sense, though it often looks like it. It's not sadness that can be cured with a change in circumstance, but it's existential weariness, a kind of fatigue that comes from carrying too much awareness for too long. You see yourself aging in real time. You feel the absurdity of your habits. You notice how quickly every high fades. You know that even your greatest pleasures are just neurons firing, and that your sense of meaning is a story your mind tells itself to avoid collapse. And once you see all of this, really see it, you can't unsee it. You stare into the abyss, and it doesn't just stare back, it moves in. And yet, you can't stop thinking, because intelligence doesn't come with an off switch. You can try to distract yourself, to numb the thoughts, to drown them in entertainment or work or relationships. But the mind always returns. The questions always return. What is the point? Why am I here? Why does anything matter? These aren't dramatic questions, they're honest ones. But they're also corrosive, because they have no final answer, only approximations, only temporary comforts. So what do we do? How do we live with this kind of mind? One option is to descend into cynicism, to let the abyss consume you, to become cold, detached, intellectually superior but emotionally dead. Another is to pretend to play the game of life as if it matters, even when you know it's a construct. But the third way, the hardest and most honest, is to live with the abyss. To make peace with the fact that you'll never be at peace. To accept that your mind will always question, always doubt, always search, and to keep living anyway. Some of the wisest people in history didn't find peace by escaping thought, but by sitting with it, by turning their torment into insight, by transforming suffering into wisdom. They didn't silence the abyss, they listened to it. And in doing so, they found something deeper than happiness. They found depth itself. Maybe that's our task too, not to escape the burden of intelligence, but to bear it with grace, but to use it not to destroy ourselves, but to illuminate the darkness around us for others and for ourselves. But here's a final question. If the intelligent suffer because of what they see, then is ignorance truly bliss? Or is there a kind of beauty in seeing the world clearly, even if it hurts? In the last part, we'll explore whether this curse can be transcended. We'll ask, can intelligence be used to heal the intelligent mind? Can we turn this curse into a calling, and if so, how? turning the curse into a calling, how to use intelligence to heal the mind that holds it so far. We've walked through the shadows through Schopenhauer's bleak terrain of intellect, isolation, and internal suffering. But now we face the ultimate question: is this curse of intelligence inescapable? Or is there a way to not just survive it, but to transcend it, and to take this burden and somehow transform it into something meaningful, something beautiful, something that gives back more than it takes? If intelligence can isolate and torment us, can it also be the very thing that saves us? To answer that, we need to reframe the entire way we think about suffering. Schopenhauer was right about many things, but he stopped at the pain. He saw suffering as a consequence of desire and awareness, and he believed the best we could do was limit our cravings and retreat into solitude. But what if suffering isn't just something to avoid or endure? What if suffering, especially the kind that comes from deep awareness, is a signal, not a punishment, but a calling? A call to do something with what we see, a call to create. Because here's the truth: the most intelligent minds in history didn't just suffer, they built from their suffering. Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Kafka, Woolf. They didn't escape the abyss, they wrote from it. They painted from it. They composed music from it. They used their minds not just to reflect reality, but to reshape it. They turned their torment into art, their loneliness into language, their alienation into bridges for others to cross. And in doing so, they discovered something Schopenhauer never fully embraced: that intelligence, when directed outward, can be healing not just for others, but for the self. The key is direction. Intelligence becomes destructive when it folds inward, spiraling into endless analysis with no outlet. But when it turns outward toward expression, toward contribution, it changes shape, or it becomes purposeful. When you take the thoughts that haunt you and give them form: a poem, a story, a conversation, a philosophy, you're no longer just a victim of your mind. You're a collaborator with it. You're using your depth not to drown, but to dive and then bring something back. And this is where the transformation begins. When you use your intelligence to articulate what others feel but can't express, you become a mirror for them. You make them feel seen. And in seeing them, you start to feel less alone yourself. Connection doesn't always come from similarity, it often comes from service, or from using your mind to relieve someone else's silence, from giving shape to the fog that clouds their soul. That's how the curse becomes a gift, not by denying the pain, but by redeeming it. This redirection also requires discipline, because intelligence without grounding becomes chaos, an endless loop of questions with no center. You have to learn how to hold your thoughts without letting them consume you. That might mean meditation, or journaling, or physical movement, or immersing yourself in nature. Anything that reminds you that you are more than your mind, and that you are a body, a presence, a being, not just a thinker. Intelligence is a powerful tool, but it's not your identity. It's a lens, not your essence. And perhaps most importantly, you must find or create community, but not necessarily of equals in intellect, but of equals in honesty. People who don't flinch at depth, who don't fear the questions, who may not see the world exactly as you do, but who respect the way you see. These people exist. They're out there looking for you just as you're looking for them. And when you find even one of them, the whole world shifts. Because now the burden is shared. The abyss has an echo. And suddenly, you're not drifting alone, you're walking together. So yes, intelligence can be a curse, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be a calling, a responsibility to see clearly and to help others see, to feel deeply and help others feel, to suffer meaningfully and help others suffer less. That's the paradox. The more you suffer from what you know, the more you can use what you know to reduce suffering in yourself and in others. And maybe that's the final revelation Schopenhauer left to us, even if he didn't say it directly. It's not the pain of intelligence that defines us, it's what we do with it. So now I ask you, what will you do with yours?